Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Phillies Daily on the Fan Arts Podcast Network. I am your host, Chris Moore. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel wherever you may be, however you may be listening. Hit that subscribe button, help us continue to grow here. The Phillies win their second in a row, 6-5, a close game, scary late with the bullpen situation. Certainly would have been disappointing to watch that one get away. Offense does a pretty solid job scoring 6 runs. Andrew Painter gives you a really good start, probably the best start of his season, or at least among them anyway. And and the Phillies obviously bullpen really taxed after a couple extra inning games against Toronto and all three games we talked about yesterday. All three games against Toronto were close, so had to use a lot of their high leverage guys, and so they were on fumes last night. And Alan Ron able to do just enough, and Johnny Bolin comes in the ninth, gets his first career big league save. So congrats to Johnny. He's been outstanding for the Phillies here the last 2 months plus. He's been arguably their second best reliever next to Joanne Duran. He's been excellent, and he was again last night, getting those final three outs, and so the Phillies with the win. Stagnant Braves, they're within 7.5 now of Atlanta in the division. The wild card, well, everybody that we would want to lose won. The Cubs won, the Diamondbacks won, and the San Diego Padres won. So Phillies stay tied with the Diamondbacks for that second and third wild card spot. 6 games, I believe it is, behind the Cubs. 5 or 6, I forget now off the top of my head. And still just a game ahead of the Padres. So Phillies handling their business, could use some help, but the most important thing, as I've talked about at this point, is to win these games, especially here in August, because September's going to be a grind. But they're doing some things that make you feel like they're going to be okay, even through a tough month of September. Obviously, we're still a little bit about 3 weeks away from September, but they're clicking in some good ways. We'll get into that. Andrew Painter, another really solid start. Held the Cardinals hitless through the first 5 innings, and then the walks were kind of felt like they were going to cause a problem, and they did in the 6th. Walks a guy, gives up a couple of base hits, and the Phillies to that point hadn't done a lot. It was 3-0 entering the 6th inning, so they had the lead, but they weren't burying the Cardinals by any means, and so the couple of hits in a row got the Cardinals back in it, and so the Phillies made the transition to Alan Ron there in that 6th inning. But I thought Andrew Painter threw the ball very, very well. Certainly appeared to be a lot more confident. Definitely feels like he's a kid that's going to rely on confidence, especially at a young age, trying to find his footing in the big leagues and here in Philadelphia. So for him to come out on the road, and like I said yesterday, I mean, this was an opportunity. Now the Phillies have a chance to really get the ball rolling, because you have Christopher Sanchez and Zach Wheeler going now these next 2 games against the Cardinals. And the Cardinals aren't the greatest offensive team. So Sanchez and Wheeler really should be able to give you good quality starts. And with the way this offense is going, I think the Phillies have a real chance to pull off a sweep here. Maybe put the Cardinals away for good, and kind of dispatch of another team you had been worried about for the wild card in the National League. But also continue to kind of keep the vibes going here. I mean, I know they lost that series against Toronto, but didn't feel like a bad series loss. Considering again the Blue Jays are a competitive team, still a chance to make the playoffs in the American League, and they're also the defending American League champions. But I mean, you look prior to that, they beat the Orioles in a 3-game set, who the Orioles have really kind of, similar to the Phillies, been clicking since the trade deadline, but the Orioles are doing it after selling guys off. So, just point being, the Phillies have been good, and I think they have a chance to really kind of keep this snowball rolling downhill right now, again, with Christopher Sanchez and Zach Wheeler going the next 2 days, and it gets to keep going because Andrew Painter gave them a really good start last night. Certainly, if the bullpen, I think we'd look at it even better if the bullpen was in better shape, and was, got through the rest of that game a little bit cleaner. But still, Andrew Painter, I'm sure he'll take it. Only his second recorded win of the season, in what's now 15 starts, I believe yesterday was his 15th start, and so, his end of the season line is not going to look good. Like, no matter what he does over these last 2 months, the end of the season line is not going to look good. But if he pitches like that down the stretch, I think we can all forget the first 3.5 months and the being sent down and everything like that. If he's that guy for the next 2 months here in the stretch run, and whatever role he ends up with in the postseason, whether it's he beats out Nola for the fourth starter spot, or he's a long guy in the bullpen, or whatever his role ends up being, in October, assuming the Phillies are there. If he again excels here down the last 2 months and excels in October, I think that will go a long way for his future in Philadelphia, his future in the big leagues, and how he's viewed here by the fan base. I think obviously we all want him to succeed, but at a certain point, young prospects kind of are they're kind of gifted like an adoration when they first come up, because they're homegrown and things like that. But also, they get it worse when they don't work out, because Painter was a guy that you could have traded and got a really good player for and whatnot. And so you're kind of, like I said, you're adored until you don't perform, and then it doesn't go well, and it happens all across big league baseball all the time. So Painter was certainly making that turn into not going to be viewed very highly, but he's still got a chance. He's still young. He's still got a chance to turn it around. And it does feel like he's starting to. I do feel like the next time he's on the mound, there will be a little bit more optimism from Phillies fans, and hopefully he can continue to keep the ball rolling. Threw a lot of fastballs last night, but kept them for the most part, away from the heart of the plate. And as long as he does that, he throws hard enough. If he just locates it, he's going to be tough to hit. And then he can mix in the sweeper and the curveball, and and can he certainly can be difficult to hit. And we saw that last night. So I'm excited about it. I'm not gonna, I'm not saying he's turned the corner and he's, it's a big four now in the Phillies rotation. I wouldn't go that far, but certainly think that he's in a position now that he can compete with Aaron Nola. If the Phillies, you'd prefer to have a four-man rotation in the postseason, and so if Painter continues to put together outings like he did last night, he's still going to have to beat out Aaron Nola, because Nola's been throwing the ball here lately as well. So, what we thought was a problem and would look like really needed to be addressed at the trade deadline, now suddenly you're feeling a little bit better about. Still have my concerns. Again, the baseball gods are kind of toying with us, with Painter having the hamstring issue last time, and Nola getting a comeback or bouncing off the leg. So we know we're that close from what the hell are we going to do every fifth day. But right now, as long as our five guys are healthy, they all seem to be throwing the ball pretty well and giving this offense a chance to win games. And this offense has performed well. 12 straight games. You have to go back to July 28th during that sweep by the Marlins. The Phillies lost all 3 games to the Marlins. You have to go back to the second game of that series to find a game that the Phillies didn't score 4 runs or more. And when you're scoring 4 runs or more and your rotation consists of Zach Wheeler, Christopher Sanchez, and Jesus Luzardo, you're going to win a lot more games than you lose. And then especially with Aaron Nola and Andrew Painter arguably pitching as well as they have all season, and especially in the case of Painter, he did not set the bar very high. I think Nola's, I saw a stat yesterday. He's given up 3 earned runs or less in like 18 of his 24 outings this season, which is pretty solid, but he's certainly had some clunkers that probably make the ERA worse than, look worse than he really has pitched this season. But I think those two are, and, especially in the case of Nola, he's consistently given solid, quality starts here for the last good month or so it's been. And now Painter, his last 2.5 starts, his last one got cut short by the hamstring injury, but he was throwing the ball solid. So, again, with the bullpen, with the rotation pitching the way, that they're capable of, this offense clicking in the way that it is. Like I said, they've scored 4 or more runs in every game since July 29th. Obviously, doesn't mean they've won them all, but they've been scoring runs. If you're averaging 5 to 6 runs, you're going to win. You're going to win a lot of games, especially with the rotation that these Philadelphia Phillies have. So, the offense. And the other thing is Luis Ariz, right? A lot of people will point to that. He's hitting 219. Like he kind of sparked when he got here, but he's scuffled a little bit since then. And listen, like I have zero concerns. He had the 0 for 6 the other night. I believe he was 0 for 5 last night, including a ground out double play in a big spot. Something we'd be crushing Alec Boehm for, but Arise, right? The guy's a career 300 hitter. He's a 3-time batting champ. He came into the came to the Phillies hitting 325. I have no concerns. He's going to be fine. And now Kyle Schwarber's going again. Schwarber got on base 4 times last night. So we haven't, no Trey Turner in the lineup last night. The only real concern right now is Bryce Harper's knee swelling up, moving him back to DH. And so, you kind of hands are tied behind your back at that point, and Alec Boehm is forced to sit on the bench, which may not be the worst thing in the world. But I don't think it's what they envisioned, and I think that they view the ceiling higher with Alec Boehm in the lineup, which I would agree with. Right, if Alec Boehm is hitting the way we've seen him hit, and he's gone on month-long stretches, I believe June or July, he was red hot, hitting just tearing the cover off the ball. He was really, really good. And I think the Phillies feel like him hitting like that could take this lineup to another level. And I agree, but, you have to find those pockets where he's hitting like that, because when he's not, he's doing what he's doing right now, which is striking out and grounding into double plays and just not giving you, much of anything offensively. So, right now it might not be the biggest deal that Harper's got a DH for a couple days with the swollen knee. And that moves Boehm to the bench. But if Alec Boehm is hitting well, then I think you're kind of at a logjam. I guess you could platoon at third base, Stott and Boehm, but I don't know. I don't know, because there's nowhere else to put him. You're not benching Arise. You're not benching Trey Turner. So you're not benching Bryce Harper, and you're not benching Kyle Schwarber. So, Boehm or Stott pretty much becomes the odd man out. And again, this is only if Boehm's hitting well, right? Bryson Stott is clearly hitting the ball baseball. You trust him much more at the plate right now than Alec Boehm. So again, it's not a discussion. It's not really a big concern right now. But if you have these problems, say we flip the month to September and Alec Boehm finds it again and is hitting 320 for the first 10 days of September, and then Bryce Harper says, "Oh, my knee's bugging me. I can't be in the outfield today." What do you do? Who are you sitting? I don't know. Probably depends. Like I said, if it's a right-handed pitcher, you probably just sit Alec Boehm and have him as a pinch hitter off the bench. But if it's a lefty, do you sacrifice the defense over there at third and put Boehm there and have Stott off the bench? I don't know. Just a potential log jam that the Phillies might have if Harper's knee doesn't settle down. But regardless, this moment, the offense is going good. And with this rotation, I think the Phillies, like I said, like I continue to say, Phillies have a chance to really keep this ball rolling here and kind of get some momentum into, like I've talked about, is a very important month of August. One other thing I just wanted to touch on last night, the bullpen, certainly on fumes, and certainly understandable why. Again, they played some close games against Toronto, in which they had to use all their high leverage guys all 3 days, it felt like. And, but it didn't feel like Don Mattingly had us in the best position last night if things went wrong, and they easily could have. I'm sure they would have rathered Ron Hell have an easy eighth and be able to pitch the ninth as well. But boy, we had no backup plan for Ron Hell. I mean, if Ron Hell did that in the 6th inning instead of the 8th, and the 6th inning gets away from you, I mean, I don't know. I would presume at that point you just leave Ron Hell in and let him get tattooed around and lose 15-6. I don't know. And again, I don't. It's easy to say sitting here. Oh, how can we go into a night with 2 relievers available? I said that Stubbs was going to throw the 10th inning. He said it's not a good plan, but it was a plan, and it was their plan. So they were fortunate that the offense is performing well and clicking and did enough for them to get wins. And obviously they'll have more guys, back and available again tonight. But I think just this bullpen continues. It's as soon as it felt like they had settled in and the bullpen, was performing better, and then they make some additions at the trade deadline, and you feel like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be the weakness we thought it was. Suddenly, it just doesn't feel very good. Orion Kerkering's been terrible. Jose Alvarado has a bad night, and then they're not available, and you're relying on Alan Ronhill to get you important outs late in the game. A guy who's a starter in AAA. Now you're asking him to come out of the bullpen, like I said, and get important outs in an important game at that point. It's just not in an ideal spot. And part of it, again, they haven't had a day off, I believe, since July 30th, since the day after that Marlins series. And that Marlins series at this point feels like it was a long, long time ago. That's part of where they're at right now is they haven't had a day off in a while, and they won't until Friday after the Field of Dreams game on Thursday. So, that's a part of where they're at. You just, you go through these stretches in the MLB season where you're playing 15 to 20 games in a row. And, especially when you're playing close games that are important, the bullpen, can start to be running on fumes, and they are right now. So I'm sure this team's looking forward to Friday, getting a day off, getting a breather. But they've got an opportunity to win some games prior to that, and so I think they need to. I think Don's got to do a little bit better job of trying to keep some of his, better high leverage guys available. You know, whether it's throw Rayleigh and Kerkering one night, and then you have Alvarado and Bolin another night to try and get it to Duran, just something to try and keep you from being in a spot like they were in last night. Again, it's easy to say sitting here, and they're in a tough spot because they've played a lot of games in a row. But that was my one takeaway from last night that I didn't really love, that we were just in that poor of a position, with the bullpen. Feels like there's got to be a little bit better foresight from the guys making those decisions, Don Mattingly and others. So, we'll see. Again, the big thing though right now, keep the ball rolling with Christopher Sanchez and Zach Wheeler the next two nights, and then try and get to Friday to give everybody a breather and everybody to get off their feet. So Phillies going to win last night, try and keep the ball rolling. Christopher Sanchez on the mound against the St. Louis Cardinals. Try and keep the wins going. They're going to have to, because the teams that they're right around in the National League, whether it's a wild card race or still holding out the littlest bit of hope that they can get on a run and maybe try and make it a race for the NL East, with Atlanta. But all these teams are winning. All these teams are playing good baseball right now, and so the Phillies need to do the same. And, they appear to be, with the way the rotation's going and the offense is going. So hopefully they can keep it going tonight. We'll talk about it all tomorrow. This was Phillies Daily on the Fan Arch Podcast Network. I'm your host, Chris Moore. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Enjoy the game tonight, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.